The thoughts and opinions on Just Some Podcast are of the hosts and guests and do not represent the views of organizations that employ them or they volunteer for. They are also not responsible for spontaneous black holes or nuclear wars that may occur. You have been warned.
Welcome, everybody, to another fun-filled and exciting episode of Just Some Podcast. This is Tom.
Hey, this is Ben. Tom, man, how's it going?
Hot. There you go.
That was how it was last week, too.
Yeah, but I think it's gotten more hotter, muy fuego. I don't know how you want me to put this, Ben, but it's happened. So it's lots of hot.
I would like it in a different language every time now.
Okay, I'm going to have to call Tiffany and figure out how to say this in Chinese and a couple other languages, but we'll get it done. It'll be all right. How are things down in Kansas?
Humid. So, yeah, there you go. No, it's not been too terribly bad other than, we're seeing a big spike in COVID cases locally, and it is what it is, and we're trying to educate the masses on wearing masks, but I think there's a silent majority that don't mind doing it, but there's a very loud minority that are adamantly against it.
Yes, that seems to be a widespread even problem. I don't think it's just in your region, but certainly we're hearing it here as well. It doesn't seem to be as loud, but there are certainly the minority, like you said, that for reasons that I can't understand, a 7-minute trip into Walmart is really bothering them with a paper filament mask. So it's something it's going to be a fight to overcome. I get tired of hearing people say we support law and order, or I'll do anything for my country, but not wear a paper mask. I don't understand that viewpoint. So.
It's like the Meatloaf song. I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that. So,
correct. Or they're like, I love my children. I die for my children, except for wearing a 3M paper filament mask for 9 minutes. I won't do that. I don't get it. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But Ben, we have a very special guest on tonight. Do you want to take us down this road?
Sure. Well, we'll let him tell his story, but we'll go ahead and introduce him.
Whoa. You mean we're not going to tell the story for the guest and just have him go? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no. I think we'll just let him do it this time.
Oh, okay.
We'll see how that works. I don't know. Well, something new. So, Anil, I want to welcome you to the show. How you doing, man?
Pretty good today.
And by today, you mean that I understand you've had some issues recently, correct?
Yeah, we've been dealing with inflammation and problems with breathing since probably May, on and off.
And Tom, the reason we wanted to have Anil on the show is, Tom, you and I have talked ad nauseum about COVID-19, and we've tried to debunk myths, and we've tried to do Facebook Lives, and we've really tried to get information out there. And then we had Shannon on the show, and of course Shannon had went to New York City and was right there kind of at ground zero of everything that was going on there. But we wanted to bring Anil on because it's going to bring a whole new perspective of COVID-19, and hopefully maybe this is a perspective that some people will listen to. I'm hopeful, Tom. I'm hopeful, damn it.
I hope so too, honestly.
But this is the perspective of a COVID-19 patient, correct, Anil?
Yes, I guess that's what I am now.
And hopefully not forever, but at least for the purposes of this podcast, that's what we want to kind of focus on is how you've went through everything and then kind of where things are now. So,
okay. Where would you like me to start on this journey?
Well, let's start at the beginning. Like, what symptoms did you develop, and then going into testing? Let's start with that.
Well, there's some question on where it started, but sometime in mid to early March, I had a bout of bacterial pneumonia, I guess is what it was, because I thought we kicked it with antibiotics and steroids and all that heavy stuff. And then about a month later, in mid-April, I was delivering a load in Indiana, and I started feeling what I thought was either another round of pneumonia or allergies, except this time I started to get really fatigued. I would, normally my days are 14 to 16 hours, and about 2 hours, and I was pulling over and taking a nap or resting or whatnot. So normally what would take me a day to get home took about 2.5. And I think the only reason I made it was on the tail end of it. I had figured out that there was definitely some sort of oxygen miss going on, and I was able to get enough breath or oxygen to keep moving if I did shallow breathing through my nose. We kind of just barely made it home, and did a telehealth visit with someone local, because at this point in time, everyone was still trying to figure stuff out, and they didn't want to see people in person. So I was diagnosed over telehealth, and they kind of felt the same way. So I got another round of antibiotics and steroids and a little bit, and my mom actually came home. She's a traveling nurse, and my wife had called her over because she didn't like the way I was looking, and they had put those finger things on me, and I guess my oxygen level was dropping pretty steadily into the 80s, so that it was kind of like crunch time. So my mother actually, no one was thinking COVID. I mean, if they were kind of in denial about it. So my mom took me to 20 minutes away to the hospital with no PPE, no mask, no nothing, while I was hacking up a lung and, trying to figure out how to breathe again. And we went to our local hospital out here, and kind of funny watching how things changed over the months. But back then I was allowed to walk into the waiting room and sit in the waiting room with everyone and get triaged and do the whole bit. And I think it hit them pretty quick that I was probably a COVID patient, because they put me in a room and after their triage, and they gowned up. It's kind of weird because it starts getting, I understand everyone was, they were doing what they could, but, the care team from that point on was really attempting to limit contact. So I think I saw the nurse once or twice, and I saw the ER doctor once, and maybe twice. But after that, most of the contact was through the phone in the emergency room. So they would call me and be like, "We saw this. The blood work says this," and I think from my inflammation markers, they'd already decided that I was going to be positive. So there was some talk about going home with an oxygen tank or what we were going to do after that. And, I think once they determined that I was probably positive, I had no desire to go home, infect the world again. So we went upstairs for observation, I think for a couple days. And not really, things get a little hazier there. But after a couple days of me not eating and they turning up the oxygen every so often, I think my heart started getting a little erratic, or there was something that bothered them, and they moved me to one of the 4 ICU beds that we have, and I think they had a pulmonologist examine me on a robot, and I think I was getting really close to having the oxygen set at 15 units. My breathing was getting a lot worse, and they
Okay.
I want to say it was about 4 days in, because we hit Sunday about there. And I think I missed their parameters for keeping me. And they talked to my mom or my wife. Well, they talked to me first because I was texting people. And I knew that I had about an hour before they were going to put me on a ventilator and fly me to KU. And they had made it pretty clear that, that they needed the resources there. The test programs there were probably the only chance that I had at that point. And I wasn't really talking much because the breathing was getting much more difficult. And I found out later from that point in time, my lungs were 80 or 90% full.
Wow.
There wasn't a lot of oxygen getting in. And, I think what he told my wife was...
So...
Okay.
Well, no, please finish and then I'll ask.
Okay, what the doctor had told my wife was that, I was fighting as much as I could, but there wasn't enough left in me to fight much longer. So that hour for me was, my hour to text people and get stuff in order and figure stuff out before I got sent away.
So a couple questions I have is, one of the big medications that everyone keeps talking about, antibiotic wise, is azithromycin, or most commonly known as a Z-Pak. Was that one of the medications that you were perhaps treated with, if you remember, prior to all this, like for one of the rounds of pneumonia?
No, I had a stronger medicine. It started with an L.
Levaquin?
Yeah, it was Levaquin was the first antibiotic.
Okay.
And the second one I was prescribed was a Z-Pak, but because there was no infection or no bacterial infection in all the blood work, they didn't do that. I know they did the hydrochloroquine or somewhere. I'm not sure if they did that before the vent or after, but it didn't have any effect, and it may have made some things worse. So that one got pulled.
And one of the other questions, and this is just because I want people listening to get some depth on this, is when you're saying I was feeling like I was the shortness of breath was getting worse. Can you tell them, like, was it a struggle to breathe, or was it like you felt like you were breathing but you couldn't move oxygen? What exactly were you feeling at that time?
It was very short, rapid breath. I was fighting for everyone. There was a period where they thought maybe I would improve. One of your past guests, Shannon, was on the phone with me through a lot of it. And her and my mother were telling me to get into a prone position. And when I was prone, my oxygen was a little bit better, and it was actually improved, but just temporarily. And I couldn't stay in that position very long. It was painful or a fight or very uncomfortable. But we had to switch between the mask and the nose oxygen delivery when I'd go on my stomach, because I was breathing a little bit better.
And I'm sorry, like, you broke up a little bit, so if you answer this, I apologize. Was it ever painful to try and breathe, or was it just you just didn't feel like you were moving any oxygen?
It was painful because I was asking for painkillers or morphine or whatever they would give me, but they were kind of stuck on Tylenol because they didn't want me to be relaxed enough to stop breathing at that point in time.
So, if you don't mind me asking, prior to being diagnosed, what were your thoughts on, because I mean, you were still obviously diagnosed pretty early on, but what were your thoughts on COVID-19 prior to you being positive for it?
Well, I thought I kind of went back and forth on how I felt about it, but I definitely was not as, I didn't take it as seriously then, and I felt like I was going to be in that 90 some odd percent that it wouldn't affect, because I was very healthy before that, except for being diabetic, but I was highly,
Right.
very tightly controlled. I'd get letters from my doctor because I would see her once a year, because she'd make me. But, I didn't get sick. I didn't have pretty healthy diet-wise. I was pretty active. I didn't see it hitting me as hard as it did. And definitely not as quick.
And I know in one of the stories that I read, a letter that you wrote in regards to this, once you were dropped off at the ER and they determined that you were likely positive and then confirmed that, there was obviously no visitors, no interaction with your family in real life. I mean, obviously text and FaceTime, but no visitors, right?
Yeah, it was it. They at first they had told my wife she could come and see me off on the helicopter, which normally they only allow guests on COVID people if they think they're going to die. At the last minute, they told her she couldn't even do that. So it was about 2.5, almost 3 weeks. I had zero contact with anyone, except for hospital staff that would.
And that has to be hard mentally. I mean, you're fighting this disease and you're struggling to breathe, and then you have no support system outside of what you can get through a phone.
Well, I guess fortunately, unfortunately, between the delirium and the 6 or 7 days on the ventilator, I don't really, that time went pretty quick. The before and after was a little more difficult though. I think before it was such a struggle just to stay conscious. It would have been, the last hospital visit I had since I was finally confirmed negative. I know it was a huge relief to my wife that she got to stay with me for the day. And, that was, she almost cried when they told her she could stay.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, that's that hour before you were intubated. I know you said that was kind of when you were trying to make arrangements and make sure everything was taken care of. But I mean, that had to be, in the back of your mind too, that because the statistics were, if patients went on ventilators, it's really hard to come off of them, particularly for COVID patients.
Well,
and I'm sure you knew that. So, I mean, that had to be going through your mind too.
Well, it was worse than that because I had read a report about diabetic COVID patients. Those odds were even worse. It was, 10 to 20% on a good day. And, I understood, because the doctor, even at the first hospital, he had made the point that the very last thing they wanted to do was put me on a ventilator because they were concerned that, that would make the odds even that much worse.
Damn. That had to be a hard position to be in.
It was, I didn't get to say the things I wanted to say because my concern was that my wife would be, okay and be able to run the business. And, so even now I regret that, it wasn't like that touching romantic last moment. It was, hey, here's how you get into the accounts. Here's how you take care of the guys. Here's how you run the company. Here's how you're okay until I get back if I do. And then, in the very back of my head was, oh my God, I was home for a day with the people I care about. And how contagious was I? Did I just kill everyone else too? And that,
Did anybody else you had immediate contact with come back positive?
No, everyone tested negative for antibodies. So no one got anything, fortunately.
Which is great. Kind of bad, obviously bad for you. So from the first hospital, you were intubated, and then you were shipped out to KU, which is obviously a big hospital system. And my understanding, of course, with you being intubated, you don't have a lot of recollection of any of that, or much of that, beyond what you've read through medical records and such. So when did you kind of start coming around again?
I have some vague memories of when they were waking me up to give me commands. They would turn I found out later, they would turn the ventilator down to the minimum and cut the painkillers down as low as they could to bring me out of it every day. And, they'd ask me to wiggle my toes or do something like that. But I remember them yelling at me to calm down and whatnot. And that's probably why I woke up restrained. They said I pulled out my feeding tube a couple times and pulled out my main line, and so I still have some scars here and there. But yeah, when I woke up, I was restrained to the bed and had the mittens on. And I remember, each day was different. There was a day or two I thought I was in China. There was a day or two I thought I was in jail. Then there was a day I thought I was in a mental hospital. And my wife and my mom would call me. They got 14 minutes on a Zoom call. And I think my wife said the first 3 days, she thought she could see in my eyes that they were open, but I wasn't there. And, I spent time trying to figure out how to, why I was there, how to get out, or, and they would ask those cognitive questions like what time it is or what day it is. And, there's the digital clock in front of you. And I had no idea. I think someone asked me a question about remembering COVID. And, just because it was in the past, I thought I'd been there a year. I was just lost. They started laughing when I got more coherent because I was trying to convince them that I never had COVID and I shouldn't be there. Yeah, there was a moment where they told me I was going to get out of the ICU and go home. And I thought that meant now. And I still hadn't gotten all my tubes removed. Still hadn't passed the swallow test. But I was trying to find my wallet and rent a car to get home.
Huh.
It was interesting. I think it really hit me that something had happened when the PT started. And, they got me to try and stand up and I couldn't. And I was like, oh, this is not good. Not a positive moment.
That had to be so odd. I'm trying to put myself in that position of, you're sedated and intubated and you're coming out of it and you don't know where you're at. Don't know how long you've been out. And then, you're trying to your brain's trying to convince you that you're fine. and that you're trying to leave, but then you can't walk. I mean, that's just got to, that's like an ultimate mind screw. I mean, just.
Oh, yeah. I will say, like, the moment where I was the most excited was the swallow test. They came in with apple juice and water for the first time, and, all that kind of stuff you really take for granted. Finally wasn't a swab on the lips. And then they brought out that mechanical soft food, which was like the ultimate tease. I guess it was better than the purple feeding tube.
Tom, do you have a question?
No, I was going to say it's interesting to hear all this because having been in ICU and done the spontaneous breathing trials and having interaction with the patients, it's just, I guess, eye-opening to hear someone's vivid, I didn't think that's what was going on. Or, like he said, he heard them laugh, and it's certainly not at him. It's just, okay, buddy. Yeah, trust me. we know where we're at, So it's just, it's also, even though I have literally been the nurse in the room with doing this, it's also extremely hard to put myself in those shoes. And I'm just listening to the story, wondering how I would have been.
I don't think they were laughing at me. That was a conversation with my wife.
Yeah.
It was kind of like, yeah, he still is trying to convince us he shouldn't be here.
Now, I've had that conversation, but yeah, it is always interesting to hear some of the answers during those trials. So
I thought the closet for a day led to a McDonald's, so my head was not there.
So how was your recovery post getting unintubated? I know you had to do some physical therapy and did some other things. So can you walk us briefly through some of that?
I actually didn't do as much physical therapy as you would expect. I mean, we did a little bit in the ICU, and then I don't know what goals I had to meet or what got me out of there, but it was 4 days, I think, and they moved me to a regular room, and a regular COVID room, as the case would be. And they brought in a walker, and I was a fall risk, and I mean, that was probably the most dehumanizing couple days because they had me on diapers and 3 different laxatives. So I moved the wrong way and it didn't go well, but I could see a bathroom that I could get to if I could just get to it. And so I mean, that was my goal to get out of there, was to get to the bathroom and a shower. And the PT people, they had the goals on the board, but they were talking to my family at that time, saying that I was going to need about a month of or 2 weeks or some time period of skilled nursing or nursing home. And when they set the goals for the bathroom and the shower, I actually hit them in it was like 24 hours, and it kind of surprised everyone, that I was that committed to that goal. And I was able to get off of oxygen on the last day, which was maybe 3 days in the regular room. I did have problems with swallowing and breathing and pain and all that kind of stuff. And I came out, I think when I left there, they had me on, I want to say 1 inhaler at that time and a whole bunch of drugs. And I was still coughing and still coughing up what they call it, COVID crap or whatever. And not really too excited to eat yet, but that could have just been hospital food.
So some of the long-term effects, I mean, what, obviously dismissed from the hospital, but what kind of things are you dealing with currently that is likely attributed to, because I think one of the things that we hear so much in the general public is, oh, well, it's like the flu and it'll go away in a few days, or, it's not going to be that bad. So, I mean, can you just kind of briefly go over some of the long-term things that you're seeing now?
Well, we've had, because I came off the steroids right away out of the hospital, and within 3 weeks of leaving the hospital, my throat closed up completely and I couldn't breathe. And we had an ambulance trip back to the hospital, and surprisingly, after the first trip, they just shipped me, as soon as they stabilized me, they threw me back on an ambulance and sent me back up to KU again. There's what we've discovered, or what we're discovering, is that there's inflammation that's been pretty severe, because we're on the upper levels of the amount of steroids we should be taking. But I still have a COVID rash on my lower back, which my primary care doctor said the amount of steroids I'm on, it shouldn't exist. and still, stamina, breathing wise, I can't run very far, maybe a quarter lap. I mean, after the last trip to the hospital yesterday, I was at like 4 or 5 trips up the stairs and back down to 1 again. So I'm taking 2 inhalers daily. I think a mixed one, Symbicort, and I have to carry a rescue inhaler everywhere on top of the steroids and some other stuff. The last time I was scoped, about a week or 2 ago, by an ear, nose, and throat doctor, she had found some damage on my vocal cords and in my throat, which they think is from the ventilator tube. We were looking at pictures of where the ventilator sat, the breathing tube sat, and we think it sat on top of some hardware from a neck surgery. But they're waiting to do a pulmonary test to rule out a lack of or my oxygen levels or breathing levels. And then we're doing speech therapy, and I guess then we just have general stamina stuff. And every time we tend to try and bring the steroids down, I end up visiting the hospital again. So they're kind of getting ruled out as a plan of attack right now.
So one of the things I heard you say, you've mentioned pain meds a couple times. Is it an overall body pain? Is it just in your chest? Is it your joints? Like, what are some of the other non-breathing issues that you've been having to deal with?
My heart rate is definitely still a little bit elevated, but and I guess now blood pressure's been high. As far as pain, I've brought that down a lot. I think the first month it was kind of everywhere, and I had lost 35 pounds and had lost a lot of muscle mass. But as far as general pain, it's pretty localized to my throat and ears and my chest if I overdo it. But outside of breathing stuff, I've been pretty lucky and localized. I know a lot of people have a lot more, say, scattered or random stuff going on that I've read about. But mine's been kind of just there. And that might be because I'm still pushing myself to stay as active as I can until my wife catches me and holds me down. She's always a little upset with it, with where I'm at or where I'm pushing myself. She thinks the steroids are giving me mental permission to do more than I should be right now.
Yeah, like a false bravado type thing. Yeah, I can see that. And I hope people caught it earlier that we've been texting back and forth, trying to determine, how we were going to do the interview and stuff. He literally said he was in the hospital yesterday again. So, this is not something that's just, I'll get it for a few days and be fine. You very well might be, but you could also be the one who is continuing to have issues and problems.
So how many times have we been in a hospital in total at this point from the first time with COVID?
I have had 4 ER visits, 3 or 4 hospital admissions. And I know the last one, my wife took what the doctor said as, because they were talking about another one, but you want specialists involved. Because if this round of steroids doesn't stay as effective as they'd like, they're talking about IV steroids, and the amount that I've been on and the length of time is concerning everyone from my endocrinologist down to my, I have a pretty extensive, more of a medical team than I ever wanted. And everyone's getting very concerned with the amount of steroids. And the plan that, as she understood it, was we have to find a way to keep you alive long enough to find out what's causing this. So the IV steroids and everything as the next step is kind of disconcerting to her and I guess everyone else. So it's definitely not out of the woods yet, as much as I'd like to believe I am.
And that was one of the things that we kind of mentioned earlier before we started recording was Anil and I were talking and endocrinology is not super happy with the amount of steroids that he's on. I'm like, I get that, but breathing is also kind of important. And we kind of want you to continue to do that. So yeah, it's got to be a delicate balance.
Yes, it's a little less delicate though. It feels like a hammer on it, but I agree. There's not too many choices because we've tried 2 or 3 times to titrate down, and every time we start to, it breaks out and gets worse again. And so it's kind of they don't want to use the local hospital as a triage center every other week. Not a good plan. Probably not good that I know everyone now. But, could be worse. I still think there's an end game to it. I think I did that to talk to the KU specialists or their heads of infectious control or pulmonary, and everyone had told me locally, "Oh, we expect this to be over in 3 to 4 months." And he looked at me and said, "Just the ventilator itself, he would expect 6 to 12 months as far as recovery." So, and there's, like I said, every single person, even when I had home health aides or home health nurses or even my primary care doctor, I can ask them questions about things. And, since I was such an early adopter, the answer to everyone is, well, we have no idea. We don't know if your lungs are going to heal all the way. Even the ear, nose, and throat specialist, and even though she's at KU and she's an assistant professor and, she's in the thick of it, I asked them, well, how many COVID patients come in off the ventilator that you have to deal with this with? And she's like, well, you're the first one.
Yeah.
So, it's just kind of in that great spot where people are assuming and guessing and experimenting, but no one really has definite answers. It's kind of like, we'll throw this at you and see if it works. And that was kind of what they did on the ventilator too. When I looked at the records, it was, oh, we'll throw this at it and see if it works. And they tried a lot of very interesting, innovative things. And, obviously they worked because I'm here.
Right.
But it was interesting because I got a different perspective. My endocrinologist did her residency at KU. So she knew a lot of my medical team up there. And she was watching what they were doing on real time, through their internet systems and everything. What her team had said is what they were testing for up there and what they were looking at and watching was light years ahead of what we were doing down here. Like they weren't even watching the things that they were watching up there. So, to me, it's concerning because, Ben, you're in my region, but we have 4 ICU beds. If it blows up out there where people are that far ahead, it's just in my head, the level of care is going to be so much different down here, and the death rate is going to be much higher. It's not to besmirch anyone that's doing everything that they have the capabilities to do, but we don't have the resources that Kansas City or Wichita does. And if they fill up and there's nowhere to go, boy, you're just there. That to me is a nightmare scenario. I heard Shannon's story of what it sounded like when they were overwhelmed out there. I mean, it's New York City, for heaven's sake. They have way more resources than we do in Kansas. That's just, my thought. Maybe I was lucky that I got the first reservation.
Well, I want you to know that we really appreciate you coming on and telling the side of it that we don't often get to see or hear, I guess in this case. Being providers, I mean, we are obviously trying to do what we can to make sure people are taken care of. But like Tom said, we like doing the checks on you in the ICU and kind of still not being there coherently and hearing it from a patient's perspective is just puts a whole different spin on things. Don't you think, Tom?
Absolutely. And again, I just keep thinking about all the times and all the people that you see on social media that are like, oh, it's just the flu. I mean, well, hell, the president of the United States said it. And I'm listening to Anil and going, my God, like this is the thing that we're trying to prevent. And it's one of those moments where it feels like I was already concerned and I had my awareness of this, but it just seems to bring it home 10 times fold. Like it just, I can't thank you enough for coming in and sharing your story and letting us know. And I'm hoping we didn't exhaust you just by having you talk for this long.
Oh no, I kind of work from home now, so I'm on the phone all the time, unfortunately.
Well, Tom, we'll do our social media shout out. We didn't do one at the beginning, so we just wanted to get into listening to Anil's story here. So you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, all at Just Some Podcast. Or you can find us on the web. We're at www.justsomepodcast.com. You can email us admin at justsomepodcast.com. Tom, real quick, what else can they do to help us out?
Well, if they would be so inclined, they can go to the Just Some Podcast website. They can scroll down to just about the bottom. They're going to see an Amazon link. They can click on that before they do any of their shopping or put anything into their cart. Then they can shop like we were never there, and they won't even know it. It's totally free, and everything they buy from that point forward gives some proceeds back to the show, and we would really appreciate it.
But man, on that note, we're going to let Anil get off here and get some rest.
Yes. Like, I feel tired for him. I'm like, oh my God, I'm wore out just thinking about it.
But Anil, again, man, thank you so much for coming on and telling your story. I know that you've been bombarded locally with interview requests, and we sure as hell appreciate you taking ours on also.
Cannot thank you enough.
Oh, it was a good time.
On that note, hey, I hope everybody has a great week.
Hey, everybody, stay safe out there.
Practice swearing just to pass the time. Lately I see why I am alone. I caught some road rage and I thought of you, and all the many times you say I should have known.